than 48 hours after Narendra Modi and Xi Jinping shook hands on the sidelines of the BRICS summit in Kazan, Russia, their words have translated into action. It wasn't just symbolism, a real disengagement in two of the most difficult disengagement zones in Ladakh have begun in earnest. It's going to be a long way. These are the first very, very tentative baby steps towards a return to normalization that will hopefully happen over the next few weeks and months. But here's the good news, viewer. The good news is that patrolling by each side across the line of actual control, across their perceived lines of where the border actually stands, will resume by the end of this month. That's right. India today has scooped exclusive information to suggest that the immediate disengagement in the Demchok and Depsang areas, which are basically in North and South Ladakh, will be completed in the next 3 to 4 days in such a manner that patrolling by both the Indian Army and the Chinese Army, patrolling that had completely stopped after May 2020 owing to the Chinese side blocking Indian patrols and the Indian side blocking Chinese patrols, those patrols will now be permitted to mutually resume before Diwali this year. Here's an exclusive report by India Today's Manjeet, Negi and Shivani Sharma reporting from Ladakh.
More than 4 years since the deadly Galwan clashes that derailed India-China ties. The two countries finally began troops disengagement at two friction points, Demchok and Depsang, along the line of actual control. 5 tents have been removed from both sides at Demchok, with Indian soldiers moving back to the west side of the Charding Nala, while Chinese soldiers are retreating to the east side of the Nala. There are about 10 to 12 temporary structures and around 12 tents on both sides, all of which are set to be removed. In Depsang, many Chinese vehicles have been removed and number of Indian soldiers reduced. Patrolling is expected to resume in Depsang and Demchok within the next 4 to 5 days. Sources in army say that disengagement will be completed by 28th to 29th of October. The disengagement operations are being closely monitored.
Broad consensus has been achieved to restore ground situation based on the principles of equal and mutual security. The consensus achieved includes patrolling and grazing to traditional areas. This is the power of engaging in continuous dialogue because sooner or later solutions will emerge.
During the key bilateral meet between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping in Kazan on October 23rd, the two leaders had welcomed the decision to disengage along the LAC.
सीमा पार पिछले 4 वर्षों में उत्पन्न हुए मुद्दों पर बनी सहमति का हम स्वागत करते हैं। सीमा पर शांति और स्थिरता बनाए रखना हमारी प्राथमिकता रहनी चाहिए। म्यूचुअल ट्रस्ट, म्यूचुअल रिस्पेक्ट और म्यूचुअल सेंसिटिविटी हमारे संबंधों का आधार बने रहना चाहिए।
With the big Ladakh thaw, India and China are looking to put diplomatic ties finally back on track. With Shivani Sharma, Bureau Report, India Today.
The first time for us to have a...
But China, as you know, viewer, is not a country that is known to be conciliatory, is not a country that gives in to concessions, is not a country that is usually flexible when it comes to its aggressive military objectives. So how come China relented? What made China relent? What made China become suddenly flexible and agree to the resumption of patrolling and the intent, at least, to move towards normalization? We've got some exclusive information about what the Indian Army's 3 major actions were over the last many months, over a year now, that actually finally turned the tables and bought India many bargaining chips in order to put the pressure on China and get them to relent, get them to soften and become flexible. Number one, You've heard all about how the Chinese had blocked Indian patrolling routes, but there was a counter-blocking of Chinese patrolling routes in some Ladakh sectors. We will not name those Ladakh sectors, but there was counter-blocking of Chinese patrols. So therefore, India had a dominant position in those sectors. Second, the Indian army took dominant positions in the Yangtze sector of the Arunachal Pradesh-Tibet border. Not in Ladakh, but far away in the northeast in Arunachal Pradesh, the Indian army took some advantageous positions of dominance, which put the Chinese on the back foot. The Indian army, number 3 point, took similarly dominant positions in the restive Asafila sector of Arunachal Pradesh as well, on the Tibet border, which put the Chinese there on the back foot. This is an area where there have been multiple clashes between Chinese soldiers trying to intrude into Indian territory, and therefore the Indian side had taken dominant positions in Yangtze and the Asafila area, which had basically grabbed and wrested the advantage in those particular areas. Now, let me just show you what the map actually looks like of the entire India-China frontage. This is what the entire India-China frontier looks like. Parts of it are an undisputed border, parts of it are a line of actual control between India and China, where the border dispute continues to happen. Now, you can see where the disengagement is taking place is in Demchok and in Depsang. Depsang is in the north, the northern part of Ladakh, and Demchok is in southeastern Ladakh. Two ends of the entire standoff zone is where the current agreements, disengagement and hopefully de-escalation is taking place. And as we've seen in our report just now, the movement of vehicles and tents and troops has already begun. The resumption of patrolling will take place in Depsang and Demchok. The other friction points which actually began as part of the standoff and escalation in May 2020, that is the Galwan Valley where the two sides clashed, the Gogra Hot Springs area, which is the last place from which disengagement happened in 2022, and the Pangong Lake. There, disengagement has already taken place. Buffer zones have been created. So no further action for now is going to be taken there. At a later stage, perhaps there will be an agreement on the resumption of patrolling there as well. As of now, there is no agreement on the resumption of patrolling in the May 2020 onwards friction points, which is the Galwan Valley, Gogra Hot Springs, and the Pangong Lake. And if you cast your eye to the extreme right-hand side of this particular image, viewer, that is the Arunachal sector of the line of actual control, and that is where the Yangtze and the Asafila sectors are, and that's where the Indian army had taken counter actions against the Chinese, taking over dominant positions in those areas on the Tibet border, and therefore buying the Indian political system some bargaining chips, some a credible power with which to pin China down and bring them to the talks table as far as agreeing to a resolution is concerned. I want to go across to India Today's Shivani Sharma, who's been reporting these exclusive details since this morning. She has spent the last couple of days in Ladakh along the line of actual control, reporting on the effects of this resolution. It's really good to see, Shivani, that less than 48 hours after that handshake in Kazan, the actual movements have begun. There's no reason to celebrate or to over exaggerate what is taking place. It's going to be a long process. There is a great amount of verification to take place as well. But Depsang and Demchok, which have been two legacy areas of friction between the two countries, it is a positive move to see that things are starting to loosen up there.
Shiv, you are mentioning the handshake, and I must tell our viewers that the first tent dismantled the very day when Prime Minister Narendra Modi met President Xi in Kazan. And thereafter, it's been the third day, 23rd, 24th and 25th. and 50% of these structures and tents have been already dismantled. And next 3 days, this disengagement will be completely over. That means the timeline that was fixed for this disengagement was of about 1 week. And the army sources have confirmed to us that by end of this month, the patrolling will resume from Demchok as well as Depsang plains. So the work will be over. And as we even speak, Shiv, the situation is dynamic. The work is being done at both these places, the friction points that you call the legacy friction points, where we've seen how both the armies were quite close to each other. The patrolling was not happening. There were temporary structures, sheds, tents, and stone huts that were being made there by both the parties. And now what is important here to understand is once the patrolling will resume, the patrolling will be done in a coordinated manner to avoid clashes, confrontation, so that they don't come close to each other once again, to avoid any kind of friction. So now the verification is being done and the videography is being done of the whole dismantling process there. The local commanders are meeting almost every day, even before this first tent was dismantled on 23rd of October. 22nd October, both the commanders at the local level, they started meeting. And this meeting is happening regularly. They are exchanging phone calls, they are meeting, and they are also verifying the dismantling process out there.
Okay, it's very, very interesting and important to acknowledge that work has begun, but there is a long and complicated path ahead before any meaningful changes. Remember, tents and vehicles and troops are being moved right now, but there are larger permanent structures which still need to be dismantled and moved out. The winter is upon us, which means it's going to be difficult for any large-scale movements, but all eyes will be on what else happens beyond this first layer of equipment and troop pullback. Thanks very much, Shivani, for getting us those first details of how that handshake is being visible and being envisioned on the ground by both sides very, very quickly. It was expected to take a few days, but it has already happened starting from the day of the handshake. Here are some details of what this disengagement actually looks like. For example, in Depsang, which has been one of the most contested, most complicated areas, as Shivani and Manjeet Negi have reported, a number of Chinese vehicles have already been pulled back. A number of Indian troops on the frontline positions have been reduced. Patrolling by both sides is expected to resume in the next 4 to 5 days. Somewhere around October 28th, 29th, before Diwali, patrolling will start taking place once again. Remember, patrolling has not happened there since April 2020. Local commanders are monitoring the disengagement, like Shivani just told us. Videography is happening, so it's not a question of one side trusting another. Each side is verifying what the other is doing, and that's why there will be stability. A full disengagement will happen, like we've been reporting, by October 28th, 29th. Clearly timed just before Diwali, so that there can be a troop reduction on the Indian side as well, and then the patrolling will actually resume. Similarly, this is Depsang in the northern part of Ladakh. If you scroll down now to Demchok, which is literally the other end of the standoff zone in southeastern Ladakh, 5 tents from each side have been removed by both the Indian and Chinese armies. Temporary structures have been dismantled. Indian soldiers are moving back to the western point of what is called the Charding Ningling Nala. Chinese soldiers are retreating to the east of that same Nala. Nala is basically a mountain stream. Local commanders are monitoring this particular disengagement. 10 to 12 temporary structures will be removed on both sides. 12 tents will be removed on both sides. Patrolling is expected to resume in 4 to 5 days. Full disengagement similarly by October 28th, 29th, before Diwali. And very, very importantly, in the disengagement zone, which have been grazing grounds for local populations of Ladakh, grazing by cattle owners will resume. That has been one big sticking point for local populations who, remember, continue to live in many of these areas where the standoff is taking place. They will be able to take their livestock for grazing in those areas. So it's a big, big step towards normalization, but there is a long, long way to go, and that bears constant repeating, because one must not be too eager to celebrate or show any euphoria. This is, after all, China we are talking about. Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma, Distinguished Fellow with the Vivekananda International Foundation, someone who has served at many different levels in Ladakh, has served on the border, at the line of actual control as well, is with us. He's one of India's best known army veterans. General Sharma, good to have you, sir. Thank you very much for being with me here on India Today. Your initial assessment, General Sharma, on India Today, we are being very realistic about what is happening, acknowledging that this is a positive step. It is always a positive step when there is some visible, disengagement taking place. But beyond the optics of this initial pullback, give us your reading of, how much further things will have to go, how complicated it will be, what is involved in this mutual verification process, even in these early days, sir.
Thank you, Shiv, for inviting me. Firstly, I wish to salute the two brave hearts of Indian Army who lost their lives in Baramulla. And I hope these two ones who was injured will be all right soon.
Same.
Now, as you rightly pointed out, this is a very positive development that has happened after 4.5 years on the Ladakh frontier. And things have been moving for a long time. There were buffers created in many other areas. These two sticking points have remained, which is Depsang and Demchok.
Yes.
Now, as your correspondents have been saying, and also what the army has already brought out today, the army commander has spoken, which says that at the Depsang, I personally perceive that Depsang is a very substantive movement forward, because we are allowed to now visit the to actually state that we have a foothold. We patrol the areas of Aksaichen, because Depsang Plateau is also part and parcel of Aksaichen.
Yes.
So till the time we start this patrolling, we were missing this out of our claims to Aksaichen as the entire area. So this patrolling points 9 to 13 will be a tremendous step forward. Now this dismantling, the Chinese, as we were told, on the other side of the Y junction were only based on vehicles. So they used to get the vehicles and they used to go back in the vehicles, and they had not made any permanent habitat. On our own side of bottleneck, we had created permanent habitat, which now stands dismantled. So taking Depsang only, the patrolling is a very positive step.
Yes.
And I think we'll have to find, since the previous protocols and CBMs were not exactly successful over a long run, those one which we entered from 93 to 2013, we'll have to now get into new protocols and new CBMs to ensure that nothing happens and there's no clash takes place. So maybe the timings will be fixed, or the strength will be fixed, and modalities will be worked out. But it's also true that the Chinese will also undertake patrolling to our own sector down from Depsang, and they'll come down to, say, for example, the post of Butse, which is the ITB post, which is the Chinese claim. Now, we'll have to monitor this also. While we are being permitted to go, the quid pro quo also states that the Chinese will come down into own areas, and they will be patrolling. So that movement closer to our road axis, closer to Butse post, will have to be monitored by us, and this is part of the quid pro quo. In the Demchok area, where, as you rightly pointed out, because of the Nala there was grazing grounds, and the Demchok villagers were having problems. I think these things will ease out now. They were face to face across the Nala. The troops will now ease out and dismantle themselves. What is the modalities of patrolling into the Demchok Nala, or what some, as you call, Chardingla Nala, or how far we can patrol inside the Nala to the CNN junction or beyond? I think those things are not clear as yet, and I think those fine things will come out in times to come. But having said that, you have rightly been pointed out that these are baby steps. You mentioned baby steps, and I'll say these are very strong steps. But yes, they are baby steps, because the buffers remain over a large area, which is starting from Galwan right up to Pegongso south, north and south banks, the entire Changchanmo Valley, which is Hot Springs, Gogra, all these are feeding into Changchanmo River. So then those buffers means there are people who are not very far from each other. Some places 6 kilometers, some places only maybe 1.5 kilometers to 2. So it's not that the tensions are easing off on all the sectors. These 2 points which were sticking have been eased out, but many other areas, maybe Gogra, the interstate distance is just about 1.5 kilometers. So those things will still persist.
Okay, we're going to keep a very close eye on these developments. General Sharma, thank you very much for helping us understand just this initial step of where things are at. Obviously, the story is far from over, and at every step, we will continue to bring you the latest with accurate analysis of where things actually stand. Okay, and now shifting focus to Canada. As Trudeau's desperate diplomatic war against India continues to boil and bubble, the layers of Canadian state hypocrisy and complicity with terrorism and organized crime are being peeled away every single day. Today, I reveal one of the Trudeau government's most brazen and suspicious actions, one that presents a new nightmare for the Canadian public to digest. On October the 14th, viewer, the Washington Post, one of the biggest and most respected American newspapers, reported that unnamed Canadian sources had secretly briefed them about how the Lawrence Bishnoi gang was being used by the Indian government to kill pro-Khalistani Canadians in Canada. Well, hours after this startling news break broke the surface in the Washington Post, a press conference was held by the Canadian National Police, the RCMP, where they repeated this claim that the Lawrence Bishnoi gang had been deployed by the Indian government to gun down pro-Khalistani criminals on Canadian soil. Now, the mention of Lawrence Bishnoi kicked up an understandable storm. After all, Bishnoi at this time was already in the headlines for allegedly masterminding the killing of Maharashtra politician Baba Siddiqui. So something was amiss here. Team Trudeau was clearly trying to use the high-profile name of Lawrence Bishnoi to amplify Justin Trudeau's allegations against India to a fever pitch. It made for a fabulous masaledar story that ticked all the boxes. By briefing the Washington Post and then having his national police say the words Lawrence Bishnoi, Trudeau hoped that that would be something that results in a firestorm. A firestorm would be lit and India would be on an embarrassed back foot. Except once again, it has backfired on Justin Trudeau. And let me explain how. You've obviously heard the name Goldy Brar, a man you've become familiar with since the killing of singer Sidhu Moosewala in May 2022. He's a Canada-based gangster who runs Lawrence Bishnoi's criminal empire from the Americas. Goldy Brar is a man who India has officially named in a dossier of wanted criminals. India has sought his extradition and provided detailed information on his criminal enterprise and activities. But here's where the story gets very interesting, viewers. So listen even more carefully to me. The Canadian government, which had placed Goldy Brar on a Royal Canadian Mounted Police wanted list, has mysteriously removed his name from that list. Why would Canada do that? What is the explanation? Goldy Brar is the Canada head of Lawrence Bishnoi's criminal gang. India has identified him and sought his extradition, but shortly after accusing the Indian government of using the Bishnoi gang to carry out killings in Canada, the Canadian government promptly drops the Bishnoi gang's Canada boss from its wanted list. I'm as confused as you are, viewer, because after highlighting the Lawrence Bishnoi gang as being an instrument of foreign interference and being used by the Indian government, one would have expected that Trudeau would have speedily acted against Goldy Brar and any other elements of the Bishnoi crime enterprise in Canada. Instead, Goldy Brar is no longer on Canada's police wanted list. There can be only three possibilities. Either Goldy Brar has been arrested, or the Canadian government is using or hoping to use Goldy Brar in some way to target India, which would imply Canada is once again employing wanted criminals as part of state policy. Or it could simply be Trudeau's famous ego directing the national police to drop any semblance of bowing to India's demands and therefore erasing Goldy Brar's name from the Canadian wanted list. The most obvious theory is that Canada might have something to hide. By dropping Goldy Brar from the wanted list, it could be seen as an attempt to minimize the Lawrence Bishnoi gang's profile, thereby avoiding scrutiny on how such figures were able to even operate within Canada for so long. The timing of the removal following the press conference where Canada highlighted Indian interference using the Lawrence Bishnoi gang confirms this. Think about it. The mysterious removal of Goldy Brar's name has only added more intrigue to an already tense situation. On the one hand, Canada has accused India of interfering, citing concerns about Indian intelligence activities on their soil. On the other hand, India sees Canada's actions, or lack of those actions, as a failure to address concerns about international criminal networks. But by removing a high-profile suspect from its wanted list, Canada has deepened the diplomatic rift, making it much harder for both nations to find some desperately needed common ground. Now let's just tell you what the Indian public thinks in response to a few questions that the Sea Voter polling company has put out. This is some data just to give you a sense of the pulse of the Indian people. Public opinion on the impact of the Canadian government's stance towards India. Well, 24% say significant, 30% say no role, 13% say it depends on the current events, 17% say opinion misrepresented by media. Now let's talk about current tensions and their impact on pro-Khalistan activities in Canada. This is very interesting. Look at this data. No significant change. There will be no significant change in Khalistani activity in Canada, says 21%. Their influence will actually increase, say 25%. And I actually agree with this because the spotlight on Khalistanis, who were otherwise pretty much just unemployed, the issue was a non-issue, nobody really knew about what it was about, now suddenly is making global headlines. So they will be feeling a sense of importance and validation by all this media attention, including here. Activities will be limited, say 22%. Too early to assess the impact, say 17%. Just a small glimpse of how the Indian public, or at least those sampled in this survey, feel about the ongoing India-Canada diplomatic storm.